Hello and welcome to Islamic Civilization, this time session 22 that deals with the Crusades and Mongols, both of them one after another coming in the Middle East, and we'll see what we have in this session 22, Islamic Civilization, Crusades and Mongols. So for the objectives of this session is concerned, we will talk about the Crusaders in the Middle East, coming from Europe, of course, massacres and the forced conversions of Muslims, Jews and Greek Orthodox Christians. Mongols followed the Crusaders. More of the same, death and destruction in the Middle East. Invasions from the west by the Crusaders and from the east by the Mongol hordes. So those are the objectives, the Crusaders and the Mongols in this session. Keep in mind that so far the Crusaders are concerned, they already knew about Islam. And so whatever hostilities they had in Europe against Islam or Muslims against the Christians in Europe, those were in the West. The Mongols, however, did not have much of any experience or any knowledge about Muslims in the West, especially in Iran or for that reason in India or in Syria or in Iraq or in the greater Middle East. So one, the Crusaders' invasions on the Middle East, that was not without knowledge. And the Mongols' invasions on the Middle East, that was without much of knowledge on part of the Mongols. So we will see the difference between the two, and so let's get to the PowerPoint. Causes of the Crusades, and the Crusades stretch from 1095, the first Crusade, to the last one in 1217. So that's a huge big period of violence. The Crusades from 1095 to 1271. The Crusades were basically Christian Europeans' holy wars. So you have, for the Crusade, there are two things. One, the person had to be a European and he had to be a Christian, and so that's what make it the Christian Europeans' holy wars upon Muslims. The first Crusade was carried out in 1095, and the last Crusade, Ninth Crusade, that was in 1271. So that's a huge big period, and these were periodic, not in rapid succession. They attacked Muslims in the Holy Land. They massacred Muslims, Jews, Christians, including women and children, and created more hate for Christians in Europe. Christian European holy wars. The first Crusade, as I said, was 1095 to the Ninth Crusade in 1271, and again they were not in any rapid succession. They came out, with big, intervals. Except for the first Crusade, which was from 1095 to 1099, all other crusades failed. They captured Jerusalem in the first Crusade, European Christians, they captured Jerusalem in the first Crusade, but lost Jerusalem to Muslims after 88 years of rule in the Holy Land. Jerusalem, which was considered by Christian Europeans as the center of the world, it was always in the Muslim hands, at least for 500 years before the Crusades, and it remained ever so in the hands of the Muslims, at least until 1967 war between Palestinians and Israelis, and now the Israelis have occupied Jerusalem, which is against the international law. So Jerusalem, the European Christians, they consider Jerusalem as the center of the world. And so, and you know, it remained, as I said before and after, in Muslim hands. The immediate causes of the Crusades: a crazy Egyptian ruler, Al-Hakim, he destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 1009 AD. And keep in mind that this church was always the Holy Sepulchre, and other churches, Christian churches, were supported, were maintained, were defended by Muslims before and after this crazy person Al-Hakim, who destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 1009. He also stopped Christian pilgrimages to the Holy Land, a very bad thing which Muslims had always allowed. Muslim rulers helped rebuild the church. Once this Al-Hakim, you know, died, the other, I mean, in his own family, Muslim rulers, they helped rebuild the church, but that the Christian Europeans did not count. And so Pope Urban, he preached the crusade in 1095. So here what you have is the immediate cause, so to speak, was that a Muslim ruler, he destroyed the Church of Sepulchre, not completely but part of it, but still it was a desecration of the church. Muslim did not like that desecration of the church, because Muslims always respected churches, and Christian you know, shrines and Christian I mean religious places in the Holy Land, and they coexisted with Muslims all along. And so this one person who did such a big damage to the church, he should have been personally punished, rather, inciting a crusade against the whole population, which you would see the result. Once you start a war, you are no longer in charge of it. It can go in any direction, whether you want it or not. And so that was a very uncalled for thing on part of the Christian Europeans, especially the Pope Urban I. And so that was, you know, it created a huge big massacre, as we will see in this one. So there is no denying the fact that this crazy Muslim Egyptian ruler Al-Hakim, you know, did a wrong thing. But then he should have been punished personally rather than punishing the whole population in the region. Okay, let's see further. Destruction of the Holy Sepulchre. Al-Hakim, as I said, a crazy ruler of Egypt, destroyed the Church of Holy Sepulchre in 1009, and there you have the picture. And then, you know, later his family paid for this. There was another reason, another cause for the crusade, and that was the Byzantine Empire, which, as you know, was Greek Orthodox Empire. They had problem with their subject, Turkish Seljuk subjects, who did not want to live under them. So the Byzantine Empire would go after, you know, those people, the Turks, the Seljuk Turks, and round them up and kill them. Of course, war is war. And then later on, the Seljuk Turks, who wanted their freedom from the Greek Orthodox Empire, the Byzantine Empire, they would go and attack the Greek Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and that's how there was for a long time the fighting between the Byzantine Empire and its Turkish Seljuk people. And it's an old theme, nobody wants to live under anybody. The Crusades, the immediate causes. Greek Christian Byzantine Empire, as I said, faced its subject Seljuk Turks, rising and attacking the empire. The Seljuk Turks, they won the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 against the Byzantine Empire, and that was a big win. The Turks took most of modern-day Turkey from the Greek Byzantine Empire. The empire eventually fell to the Turks in 453 AD. So you give them 400 years or 300 years, and you would see the Turks would take their Turkey, their country, and much more. So here, the Byzantine versus the Seljuk Turks struggle. One Turkish Seljuk leader, Alps Arslan, he was the winner of the Battle of Manzikert against the Byzantine Empire, and he humiliated Romanos IV, a Byzantine emperor. And this would not go in history, you know, slightly with the Turks, with the Greeks. and other Christian people in Europe. And so this hatred between the two would intensify. On the one hand, the Byzantine were Greeks and the Seljuks were Turks. So there was the racial or ethnic hatred between the two of them. The Byzantine Greeks, they were the rulers, and the Turks, the Seljuks, they were the subjects and rising and did not want to live under the Greek Empire, and definitely. And then both also added fire, the religious fire, to their old political ethnic hatred, and that religious fire was the Greeks were Christians, the Greek Orthodox brand or sectarian group, and the Seljuks, Turks, they were Muslims. So for those people who wanted to read it as the fight between Islam and Christianity, they could do so, and that's what at least the Byzantine Empire portrayed this invasion of the Turks, who wanted their freedom, in fact, portrayed this as the rise of Islam against the Byzantine Greek Orthodox Empire. And definitely the Greeks would get help from the Romans or the Roman Catholics in Europe. Let's see further. So Pope Urban II, he preached the First Crusade. So Alexis Comnenus, the Byzantine emperor, he sought and received help from the Pope who preached the First Crusade. And so Comnenus, the emperor, he begged the Pope that he was under attack of the Muslims, and so he should help him, and that help he got. Pope Urban II helped Emperor Comnenus. There you see Comnenus on the right and the Pope Urban II on the left, preaching the crusade, telling people that you should go and help your brothers in the east, in Greece, even though the same church had excommunicated the Greek Orthodox Church, and the love between the two, or the hatred between the two, was mutual. The First Crusade. Godfrey of Bouillon, the French, he successfully led the First Crusade, and he became the first ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem when he took Jerusalem out of the hands of Muslims. In that First Crusade, the Crusaders, they captured the city of Jerusalem and massacred its population. And that population, of course, would not be just only Muslims. Jerusalem, the city in the Holy Land, it had Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And so the European did not know that there were Christians in the city, in Jerusalem. And so they massacred, they would not think of killing, men and women and children, Muslim and Jews, but the story is that at least they should have spared the Christians. But they could not tell who was Christian because all of them spoke Arabic. Even today you cannot tell the difference between a Muslim Christian Arab and a Muslim Arab. And so both are Arabs, they look alike, but the difference of religion is the difference, and you cannot tell the difference between the two of them, who is a Muslim and who is a Christian, and that's exactly what the Europeans did not know. So they butchered all of them, massacred, and somebody asked someone, most probably say the higher authority in the church, we don't know who is who. And he said, no, butcher them all, kill them all, and God would separate them, who was Muslim and who was Christian. So, which meant that the Muslim would go to hell and the Christian that you butchered, they would go to heaven. And don't worry about it, just carry out the massacre, and that's exactly what happened. The First Crusade, yes, they won the war against the Muslim. They became the rulers, the Europeans, the rulers of Jerusalem, but at the cost of a huge big massacre of Muslim, Jews, Christians, men, women, and children. Let's see further. The First Crusade. Peter the Hermit, he led his own crusade that was called the People's Crusade. And this one really did not, make it so much in the Holy Land. So what they did, this particular crusade, they massacred Jewish population inside Europe. That was his own, type of a crusade, which they were supposed to go to the Middle East and maybe kill Muslims, but they rather would kill Jews in Europe, especially in France and Germany, and that's what they did. So some crusaders, they massacred Jews, and so the First Crusade is also called the First Holocaust in 1096, and the reason was simple that Jews were killed in huge big numbers in Europe, and they were considered like the spies for the Muslims or for whatever reason, and there were other reasons. Theological reason that the blood of Christ was on their hands, and some other, uncalled for things that they killed the Jews in Europe. European Christians, they falsely accused Jews of blood libel, which meant that the Jews, once a year at their ritual, they would gather or they would steal Christian children and would take the blood out of them for some unknown ritual, which was completely wrong and false. So this was Christian European, and I say Christian European because the Middle Eastern Christians never believed in this thing. So it was only confined to Europeans in Europe that they believed wrongly and falsely. They believed that once a year for certain Jewish ritual, they needed the blood of Christian children. And so on that day, Christians in Europe, they would tell their neighbors, watch out, today is the day they might steal your child. And so that created a lot of hatred, uncalled for and wrong hatred for the Jewish population that lived among them for centuries, and this they would do on yearly basis. And so these Jewish massacres by the Christians, that was a common theme in the Middle Ages in Europe. Let's see further. Crusader also killed non-Muslims. Crusader massacred non-Muslims, and those non-Muslims would be Jews in Western Europe, like in France and Germany. European Christian falsely, as I said, accused the Jews of stealing Christian children for blood rituals. Considered Greek Orthodoxy as heresy. So the Roman Catholics in Western Europe, they considered the Greek Orthodox in Eastern Europe as heresy, and so they would also kill them. So Roman Catholic Church and Greek Orthodox excommunicated each other, which means one telling the other you would go to hell. And so that excommunication would be later on lifted centuries later, but the hatred between the two existed and did a lot of damage. On another note, in Europe, King Alfonso I besieged Lisbon, which was a Muslim city at that time in Portugal. So he carried his own sort of a personal crusade against the Muslims in Lisbon in Portugal. This was the king of Portugal, so he wanted to cleanse Lisbon, which is the capital of Portugal, of Muslim population. And so 1147, that's what he did. And so he forced the Muslim to surrender, and the Muslim had to. So to escape massacre, they surrendered, the Muslims surrendered Lisbon to King Alfonso I in 1147. So that's a personal crusade on part of King Alfonso. He cleansed the city of Muslims, and so Muslims they were smart to just leave the place, the city, and surrender to the Christian ruler. The Second Crusade sacked Constantinople. It was supposed to go to the Holy Land and maybe to the Middle East and kill people there, Muslims. But what they did, they went rather to Constantinople, which was the capital of the Greek Orthodox Christian Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and did a lot of damage. They massacred the population inside the city. They did not bother to, that these were Christians, fellow Christian, but they didn't think of them as Christians. So here you see these images, throughout, Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, of the massacres that the Western European Christians carried out in Constantinople, which I said was the capital of the Greek Orthodox Christian Byzantine Empire. And so that happened in 1204 in the Second Crusade. And one writer at that time, he said, for 3 days they murdered, raped, looted, and destroyed on a scale which even the ancient Vandals and Goths would have found unbelievable. So this was, a horrible type of massacre of the people in Constantinople, and all carried out by Christians from Europe, mostly Roman Catholics. And so here is one point that I should say, and that is that the Pope did not instigate this crusade, Second Crusade, against the Greek Orthodox Church. This is for sure. But once you start, a monster like a warfare, then it is out of your control. You don't accompany them. The Pope never accompanied them to Greece or Holy Land. He was sitting behind, and so these people would go and kill whoever they wanted to kill, mostly Jews and Christians, Greek Orthodox in Eastern Europe, and Muslims in the Holy Land. So, so there are these studies and people saying, was the leadership, especially the Pope, as the head of the Roman Catholic Church, was he responsible for all these massacres of Jews, Greek Orthodox Christians, and Muslims in the region? And so it depends on whom you ask. If you ask the victims, they would say, yes, the Pope was personally responsible. The church was responsible. If you ask the papacy, they would say, no, we did not, ask people. In fact, this is true, that the Pope would excommunicate. He threatened. He would excommunicate those people who would kill. He would excommunicate those Roman Catholics who would kill the Greek Christians. And so that is also, on the record, and I thought I should set the record straight here. But as I said, once you start the monster of warfare, it is always out of your control, and nobody knows what would happen during the war. Let's see further. Saladin rise against the Crusaders. After 88 years almost, Saladin, he ruled from 1174 to 1193. His European called him Saladin, but his real Arabic name is Salahuddin Ayyubi. Ayyubi, that was his family, and so his real name was Salahuddin. So European could not pronounce Salahuddin, they would say Saladin. Easy, and so he stuck with that name, European name Saladin, otherwise his name was Salahuddin. He was a Kurd, a Kurdish Muslim ruler of Egypt, and he defeated the Crusaders in the Battle of Hattin in 1187. So he rose against the Crusaders' kingdom in Jerusalem and gave them a fight and defeated them. He drove the Crusaders out of Jerusalem, brought the Jews back to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was cleansed of Jewish population, and so he knew that the Jews were still in the region and they wanted to come to Jerusalem. And that is why he asked them that you are free to come back to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is now safe in the hands of the Muslims. And that is how the Jews went back to Jerusalem and took their places in Jerusalem. But this taking of Jerusalem by Saladin also started or caused the Third Crusade, which went from 1189 to 1192. So the Third Crusade is coming. Salahuddin defeated the Crusaders in the Battle of Hattin and drew them out of the kingdom of Jerusalem after 88 years of rule. So the Europeans had ruled, mostly French, they had ruled Jerusalem for 88 years, and eventually he kicked them out. But then it started, as I said, the Third Crusade. And so Saladin here, he watches the Guy of Louisiana surrendering to him in 1187, and that was as a result of the Battle of Hattin in 1187. So the Crusaders' kingdom in Jerusalem, that was mostly under the French. So the French ruled there because they were the one who, led the First Crusade, and that's where they captured Jerusalem. And so mostly French would rule Jerusalem. And so he rose against them, and the last king of the Guy of Louisiana, he kicked him out, and he made him to surrender as the result of the Battle of Hattin. But that would not be the end of the coming of the Crusade. So he started the Third Crusade in a way, Saladin, when he captured Jerusalem, the Pope had to start another crusade, and this time let's see what happened. Pope Urban II and Saladin, although they never met, but when Saladin captured Jerusalem and Pope came to know of this, the Pope died of shock in 1187. He could not believe that again the Muslims captured Jerusalem, and so most historians believe that the Pope died of heart attack when the news was delivered to him that yes, the Muslims have confirmed that the Muslims had captured Jerusalem under the leadership of Saladin. But he had preached, and the papacy wanted another crusade, the Third Crusade, and so that was brought by Richard the Lionheart, the famous king of England, and he led the Third Crusade from 1189 to 1192. The Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart, king of England, very much romanticized this person in the history of Europe. He launched the Third Crusade. This Third Crusade is also known as the King's Crusade against Saladin, because beside Richard, the king of England, other kings also joined him in the Third Crusade, and those were first the king of England, Richard himself, and then Philip II, king of France. When he joined the crusade, in the middle he did reach to the Holy Land, but then he went back for some reason because he had problems back home, and so he went there, and he did not like to be under the leadership of Richard, the king of England. So there you have the hatred between the two of them. Friedrich Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Germany, he died before reaching Jerusalem. What happened to him? He was an elderly gentleman, and so he was crossing with his forces a river which was not really a deep or big river, shallow river, but the current at that time was very swift and rapid, and so he was advised by his soldiers not to ride, rather use the bridge. And so he sort of wanted to maybe show off his strength, an old man, and so he took his horse inside the water, and there the horse could not stand the current, the force of the current, and so the horse fell, he fell, and both were drowned, and he got killed in the river. They found his dead body eventually, and then they took him back home, and so that's what happened to Friedrich Barbarossa, a very powerful king, the Holy Roman Emperor. Philip II, as I said, he did not like Richard, and so he also left the crusade. So King, the Lionheart, Richard, he was on his own, alone in the Holy Land. Let's see what happened to him. The Third Crusade, Richard, he defeated Saladin in the Battle of Arsuf in 1199, but failed to capture Jerusalem. It was a major defeat for Saladin at the hands of Richard, but that would be the only first and last defeat of Saladin in this business of crusade. And so, but Richard failed to capture Jerusalem, which was in the hands of Saladin. He tried his best, different strategies. Richard tried his best, different strategies to capture Jerusalem, but failed. He defeated Saladin's army, fine, in 1199. He captured quite a few cities in the Holy Land, in the coastal area especially, but failed to capture Jerusalem. He left the Holy Land to save his throne back home in England, because his brother, King John, he wanted his throne. So King John, the brother of Richard, schemed against Richard and wanted to take his throne, which he did eventually. Let's see further what happened to Richard the Lionheart, King of England. He was desperate to draw Saladin into a battle. The story is that Saladin, he knew that Richard had quite committed forces. And Saladin forces, although not enough, but still enough to give Saladin trouble on the ground. And Saladin was smart. He was older than Richard, but he was smart not to go face to face and fight fight Richard. So Saladin stayed on the fringes. He kept Jerusalem in his hand and would not go in the open to fight Richard. And that is what Richard wanted. Richard did a lot of bad things, but could not force Saladin to come out and give him a fight in the open. And Richard really wanted to take his entire army. Only by killing his entire army, Richard could capture Jerusalem, and that was his strategy. And Saladin would not let him succeed in that strategy to give him an open field fight. Let's see further. All right, so he was desperate to draw Saladin into a fight, and Saladin would not do that. Richard had taken a lot of prisoner of wars from the cities that he captured, and now you see what he did. He massacred Muslim men, women, and children, and these were his prisoners of war that he had captured in different cities in the Holy Land. Okay. Later on, after this massacre, he offered his sister in marriage to Saladin's brother, but the marriage did not materialize. Very strange strategy on part of the Lionheart, and that was that he believed that if he offered his sister in marriage to Saladin's brother, he might be able to create a split in the family of Saladin. And so definitely, that was a effective strategy, but it did not work. And the story is that Richard had not consulted his sister, and so he had brought her to the Holy Land, and he went to her and said that I promise you your hand to the brother of Saladin, and you marry him. And she told him, you better kill me right now, right here in the Holy Land, rather than, accepting an infidel as my husband. So he could not kill his sister, of course, and so the marriage did not work, even though Saladin permitted his brother that although this is a trick on part of Richard, but accept the marriage anyway. And so he accepted the marriage, but then, Richard's sister did not accept it, and so that's how his scheme, did not go through. But this is what tells you the desperate, situation on part of Richard. Other historians tell us that after this massacre that he carried off men, women, and children, he came to know that that was a bad thing that he did. We don't know if really, he realized that or not, but he wanted to leave the Holy Land in peace. And so he realized that it was not, Jerusalem was not really the worth to fight, although he had come all the way from England. He lost his throne. When he went back to England, he was captured, taken hostage in France. And so his brother, King John, he had to ransom him. So he had to, King John had to tax people to, get enough revenue, enough ransom money, and he got that ransom money to the French and got his brother released, and then he died. Richard died when he reached England. Another story is that the English landlords, he would not give King John money to get his brother out of France, ransom his brother. So they asked him, okay, we will give you money, but you have to give up some of your privileges, and we have to get certain privileges. And those privileges that the landlords got, that is enshrined in what is called the Magna Carta. So in a way, the Magna Carta owes its existence to the Crusades, in the sense that Richard needed to be ransomed, King John needed money. That money was with the British, with the English landlords, and they would give that money on the promise that they would get, privileges and certain rights that were enshrined in the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which is considered to be, the first of its kind in Europe, which reduced the power of the king and increased the power of the local nobility in England. Let's see further. Richard versus Saladin, right there, both are, glorified, both are romanticized. On the left, you see the statue of Richard on the horse in London, and that of Saladin, you see that in Syria, in Damascus, in the capital of Syria. Okay, there are a lot of romanticism about both, and so you need to watch out. Okay, Crusader states minus Jerusalem, and so there Richard stands and watches the cities that he had captured on the coastal side of modern-day Palestine and Israel and Lebanon and Syria, which he had to quit, and that's what he did. So he had all these cities, the Crusader city minus Jerusalem, which ever since stayed in the hands of the Muslims. The legacy of Crusades. The Crusaders captured and lost Jerusalem, as we noticed, created a lot of hatred among Muslims and Jews against Christians for the massacres that they carried out. Eventually, European Christians were kicked out of the Holy Land one by one. And these Crusaders, who were supposed to give help to the Christian Byzantine Empire, they weakened it. And that was the wrong policies of the European Christians. They weakened their brothers, Christian brothers, and their empire in the East, the Greek Orthodox Church in the East. Okay? Crusaders were followed by Mongols. I should say here that there is really no documented connection that the Mongols attacked the Middle East because the Crusaders had weakened the Middle East. With all these crusades going on for a long time, the death and destruction and the massacre that went in the Crusades in the Holy Land, some people believe that that is what the Mongols were attracted to also. The Mongols believed that Middle East was very rich, and if they came and looted and killed people, they would get rich. And so that could be, a good reason on part of the Mongols. They wanted just to loot, and extend their empire, and you would see their empire huge and big, a great empire that they created, and that empire later on pretty soon would, crumble. But there is no historical documented connection between the Crusaders and the Mongols. Just because the Mongols, followed the Crusades on the Middle East, that does not mean that there was really a historically documented connection between the two, the Crusaders and the Mongols. But they happened anyway, one after another. Let's see. The Mongols invaded the Middle East. Mongols invasion in the Middle East. Genghis Khan, although same name as mine, but no connection. Okay. European pronounce his first name as Genghis, but his real pronunciation is Genghis Khan. Doesn't matter whether you call him Genghis or Genghis, he was the Khan. The great Khan of the Mongol Empire, which stretched eventually from China in the east through Russia, through Iran, to Iraq in the west. So it included East Asia, China, most of Russia, including Ukraine, including parts of Poland, Iran, and almost entire Iraq. So 30 years old, Genghis Khan, he was 30 years old when Saladin left the Holy Land. Okay? So most probably he knew what was going on in the Middle East because he's a 30 years old man, and he definitely knew something about it, but there is no connection between the two of them, as I said. Okay? Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan or Hulaku Khan, Hulaku is also fine as Gu is fine. So Hulagu Khan, he in fact attacked the Middle East and destroyed Baghdad in 1258. Okay? But eventually he was also defeated by the Muslims in the Holy Land, just as Saladin had defeated and frustrated Richard to leave the Holy Land. This is what the Muslim would do also to the Mongols in the Holy Land. Genghis Khan, right there, a famous portrait of Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, which eventually, not in his time, but later on, his sons and grandsons would expand that empire, and it eventually would stretch from China to Iraq. The founder of Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan, and here is the map of the Mongol Empire. So it has entire China, parts of Russia, Ukraine also, and minus India, of course, but it has Iran and Syria and parts of Iraq. Okay? And now the Mongols wanted to take Egypt. Let's see. Mongol invasion in the Middle East. Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, he destroyed Baghdad in 1258. He captured Baghdad, a huge big massacre that he carried out in Baghdad. Hulagu Khan, he imprisoned the Caliph in Baghdad in his Baghdad treasure. So there was a huge big treasure of the Caliph full of gold and all sorts of jewelry, and so he captured the Caliph and imprisoned him in his own treasure. And right there you see the Caliph is taken to the treasure in prison, and there he died because he could not eat all that gold that he had hoarded, and most probably that was the lesson that Hulagu Khan wanted the Caliph to learn. Okay. Mongols invasion in the Middle East. Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis, destroyed Baghdad right there, and so this was also an enormous death and destruction, a massacre of the people that the Mongols carried out in the city of Baghdad. There are these stories that the two rivers in Baghdad, especially the Euphrates River in Baghdad, it had two types of color, black and red. Red color was from the blood of the people that were massacred in the city, and the black color was the color of the ink of the books that the Mongols destroyed in the libraries of Baghdad. At that point in the whole world, there was not a single city that could match the libraries and the book and the knowledge that Baghdad was or Baghdad had. And so Mongols did not understand any of the Arabic or the Greek or the Hebrew languages in which these books were written, and so they destroyed all the books. They were not really lovers of the book anyway to begin with. So the legend is, or the real story is, that River Ferat, River Euphrates, had two colors, red from the blood and black from the ink of the books. Okay, let's see further. Hulagu Khan, he conquered Syria also. Once he took Baghdad, he could take Syria, and that's what he did. He captured Damascus, the capital of Syria, and he was enormously helped by Christian forces in the region. Okay, that's another strange thing. Most probably these Christians believed that Muslims were their common enemy, and especially he had Hulagu Khan in his army. He had this Christian general Kitbuka Noyan. He was a Nestorian Christian in the Middle East, and he was a general of, he had surrendered to Hulagu Khan, and so he made him a general in his army. And so Christians celebrated the Mongol conquest in the region, and they prayed in the Grand Mosque of Damascus. The Grand Mosque of, the Great Mosque of Damascus, Christian prayed there to celebrate the Mongol conquest of the region. Okay. Hulagu Khan had to go back to Mongolia, and he appointed Kitbuka as the commander in Syria, commander of his forces, Mongol forces in Syria. So, this commander Kitbuqa, he had Mongols with him, and he also had Christian forces in his army. So, in 1260 AD, Mongol forces along with their Christian allies invaded the Holy Land, Palestine, to get to Egypt. And Egypt, was one of the most resourceful land in the Middle East, and most probably that's what the Mongol wanted to go. But they had to go through Palestine, through the Holy Land. As you see this map, Palestine is in the middle between Syria in the north and Egypt in the south. So, he had to go through Palestine, and the Egyptian Muslim rulers, the Mamluks, they were smart. They wanted to give fight to the Mongols way before the Mongols could reach Cairo or Alexandria in Egypt. So, they were smart. They raised a huge big army and came to Palestine, and right there they stopped the Mongols in Palestine and gave them a very tough battle. Let's see. So, Mongols, their greatest ever defeat in Palestine in 1260 AD, Muslim forces of Mamluk Egyptian rulers inflicted the greatest defeat on Mongol forces and their Christian allies in the famous battle of Ain Jalut, which means the spring of Goliath. It's a place in Palestine, and so there the Egyptian forces, Muslim Mamluk forces, they gave a battle to the Mongols and their Christian allies, and they defeated the joint Mongol and Christian forces under Kitbuqa. And so that is considered to be the first and the last of the defeat of the Mongols, and after that the Mongol never dared to come to the Holy Land, Palestine, or never dared to come back and take revenge and capture Egypt. Even if they must have wished this, but they just simply did not have the forces enough or the strength or the courage to come back to all the way to Palestine, the Holy Land, and Egypt. Historians believe that most probably in Mongolia, when there was the big fight, internal fight among the Mongol rulers, that who would be the next Khan, who would be the next leader of the Mongols, that is what forced Al-Hakim Khan not to come back, even if he must have been dreaming of taking revenge for this greatest defeat. But he could not come back, most probably because of the internal problems that he had. So, he must have told himself, just stay home and take care of, what you have already conquered, rather than going further into the Holy Land, Palestine, and, to Egypt. And I think that was a good policy on his part, because it saved a lot of people. Okay? But Mongols would never accept a defeat. But here, the first and the last of its kind that they did accept. Okay. Let's see further. Muslim victory in the Battle of Ain Jalut over the Mongol Christian army saved Jerusalem and Cairo from Mongol massacres. Both were heavily populated cities, and there you see, the Dome of the Rock in Palestine, in Jerusalem, and so it would have been a big massacre, but thank God it did not happen. Some Mongols, interestingly, converted to Islam, and one Mongol leader, Ghazan Khan, the grandson of the great Khan, the grandson of Chengiz Khan or Genghis Khan, he converted to Islam. Other Mongol rulers also converted to Islam. After destroying Muslims and their cities, they converted to Islam. Very strange, but you never know what people can do. So, they mixed with Persians, Turks, and Afghans, and created a mixed breed of people also. Created states in Central Asia and South Asia, as later on we would see that. Okay. So, here you see Ghazan Khan. He was born and raised as a Christian, and he studied Buddhism, but converted to Islam for good political reasons. And most probably the good political reason was that because he was ruling Muslims in the region, like places like Iraq and Syria and parts of Iran. So most probably he thought that he should convert to Islam so that there would be a sort of religious affinity between the rulers, his family, and the people, the subject people, Muslim people that he ruled. And so for that political reason he converted to Islam. If he had converted to Buddhism, there were no Buddhists, and no one could help him. So that's how he was smart to convert to Islam. And other his family members would stay in Islam, and then they stayed in the population, and eventually they were assimilated in the population. So Mongols would not be any more Mongols as they used to be, known for death and destruction. Now they were Muslims. They took care of their rule and the people that they live among them. Okay, let's see further. Some Mongols converted to Islam. So Ghazan Khan, beginning with Ghazan Khan, he even learned the Quran, how to read the Quran, the holy book of Islam, because he wanted to be a good Muslim, especially in the eyes of his people. So Mongols and massacres and these invasions, the Mongol invasions followed the Crusaders. But as I told you, there is no historical connection between the two of them. And they both inflicted death and destruction in the Middle East and in the Holy Land, caused the division and the end of the big empires. Those big empires were the Abbasid, the Byzantine, very powerful empire, and the Song Empire of the Song dynasty in China also crumbled because of the Mongol invasion. As I showed you in the map of the Mongol Empire, it contained most of China and parts of the Abbasid Caliphate, Syria, Baghdad, in Iran included, and the Byzantine Empire also collapsed because of these invasions. The Byzantine Empire was especially weakened by the Crusaders, who, ironically, as I said in the beginning of this session, the Roman Catholics, they had started this crusade to help their Greek Christian brothers in the East. And so there were two brands of Christianity at that time, and they are still there. One based on Rome, which is called the Western Church, and also called the Roman Catholic Church, based on Rome. Byzantine, they were based in Constantinople, a city in Greece, and in about 330 or 333 AD, a Roman king, Constantine, he moved out of Rome and went east to this city called Byzantium. And when he went to that city, captured that city, turned it into his capital, and renamed it after himself as Constantinople. So Constantinople, which means the city of King Constantine, originally was known as Byzantium. And so the family of Constantine became known as the Byzantine. And the empire that he started there, founded there, would be called the Byzantine Empire. And the capital would be called Constantinople. This Byzantine Empire, very important in the history of Eastern Christianity, in the history of the Greek Orthodox Church. This would bring most of Eastern European to Christianity. So that's why today, if you see any Christians in the Eastern Europe, especially in Russia and Greece itself, these are the Greek Orthodox Christians, because the Greek Orthodox brought them to Christianity. So it goes like this: if whoever visited you or grabbed you or conquered you, they are going to impose their own brand or sectarian Christianity. So look at Poland in Eastern Europe, but it is Catholic, and the reason was simple, because it was conquered by Rome. Russia, which is Greek, but was brought to Christianity by the Greek Orthodox Church. In fact, the Greek Orthodox Church sent two brothers, Cyrillus and Methodius, to invent a script to write the Russian language. Russian did not know how to write their language, so these two Greek Orthodox priests went to Russia And that's why the Russian script, which is based on the Greek script, is called the Cyrillic script, because Father Cyrillic and his brother Methodius, they created that script, and so Russian, enjoy their script, the Cyrillic script, and they can now read and write their language in the Greek, in the script that is based on Greek. And so that is how it depends who got you, and they would give you their brand of religion, whether Catholic or Christianity. And so let's see further. Mongols and massacres, as I said, they inflicted death and destruction in the region. They caused the division and the end of the big empire, especially the Byzantine and the Abbasid. The small numbers of these ruthless people, Mongols especially, and also the Crusaders, they were eventually assimilated among local people in the Middle East. So if you go to the Middle East, and somewhere from about Iran in the east up to Syria in the west, in this Middle East, on the one hand, if you see some Mongolite features of people, definitely these are the descendants of the Mongol people. One particular group in Afghanistan, which lives to the southwest of the city of Kabul, the capital city, and that particular group is called Hazara. They are Shia Muslims, but they are in the region they are called Hazara, and they have Mongolite feature, and they themselves say that they are the descendants of the Mongols who came to Afghanistan and conquered Afghanistan. So you would see Mongolite looking people. Also in the Middle East you would see a lot of Caucasian looking people, and that was because the Europeans came, they married the local women, and that is how they had you see the European looking people in the Middle East. Let's see further. Well, we are now in review. The Crusaders and Mongol invasion we talked about, invasion from the west and invasion from the east on the same place, Middle East. They changed the history of the Middle East. Massacres, destructions of people and places, they did both Crusaders and Mongols. However, it would also lead to the rise of new regional states and empire that we talk about in the next session. The history of hate and hostilities would continue, and so that's what in review, and here comes a reaction report in session 22. Write brief notes on any aspect you learn in this session. The Crusaders and Mongols invasion on the Holy Land in the Middle East. And also, did you notice any difference between the Crusaders and Mongols invasions? So, I'll really appreciate if you see any change, any difference between the two of them. Okay. Well, stay engaged. Any question, any comments? Just go to Laulima, check your assignment and send me any message that you might have for me. And that is the end of session 22nd. We did a lot in terms of the Crusades and Mongols. Thank you very much. Aloha.